CPS workers of Reddit. What was the worst case you've seen? It was one of the first cases I investigated, but it involved a child death. There was actually another worker assigned to take the priority 1 cases that day, but she was stuck out in the boonies working for another emergency when we got the call. A 2-year-old child had been brought to the emergency room by her mother. The child was cold and blue and she had a living sister, age 3. I had just been cleared to take P1s and my unit supervisor sent me to start working the case. She also called the region to send us a special investigator, a CPS investigator with police or military experience. They have special privileges in their work. By the time we got the report, police were already questioning the mother. It was my first time to witness a police interrogation. The mother refused to speak English during the interview, and she had her friend translate for us. For some reason, there wasn't a Spanish to English translator brought for the interrogation. Anyway, the mom claimed the child had been jumping on the bed with her sister when she fell off and hit her head on the floor. She was vomiting later in the evening, and when the mother checked on her the next day, the child was dead. Super sketchy, as preliminary reports showed no head injuries. We went to the police to investigate the scene with the police and the mom, and everything had been stripped bare. All the furniture and family possessions gone. It smelled strongly of bleach. It was the first time I had a close look of the mom, and she had bruising on her neck, a huge fresh bruise under her chin, and her eye was swollen. She claimed she slipped and hit her chin on the kitchen counter. Anyway, in the following days, we learned the truth. A year prior, CPS investigated the family when it came out that the mom's boyfriend was abusing the children, pulling their hair out, slapping them, etc. The department required the mom to end her relationship with the boyfriend, which she did, and provided therapeutic services for the family. But a few months after CPS left, the boyfriend came back to the home. The night of the 2-year-old's death, she messed her pants while the boyfriend was watching a sports game. He got angry and kicked her in the stomach, but he kicked her in the stomach so hard it almost lacerated her liver in 2. The mom was correct in that the child had been vomiting and sick the night before her death. This child spent her last hours on Earth suffering a painful death. The mom had waited so long to take the girl to the hospital because she wanted to give the boyfriend lead time to escape. He ended up going to Mexico, where he was later found. He was brought back and charged for his crime. Both he and the mom are now in prison. The little girl's big sister was reunited with their biological father, who had been spending the past few years trying to find the girls. He was inconsolable with the news. It was by far the worst case I have ever worked. Child death cases always are. As an employee with CPS, your job is to protect children, and when you work a case with a dead child already, you feel so useless, so helpless. Well, this is as good a time as any, I suppose, to be like, hey, this thread is going to have some heavy stories involving children. If you don't want anything to do with that, now's your time. There's going to be some really tough stuff to get through in this thread, but I think stuff that's also kind of important to talk about. Like, if you want to know more about this stuff for whatever reason, then it's important to have it out there. So here we go. Story 2. I didn't work in CPS, but I did work closely with CPS. I worked for a nonprofit emergency shelter for children who had been abandoned, neglected, or abused. Mind you, I worked at the shelter 10 plus years ago, so the details are a bit fuzzy. I get a call one night, worked graveyard, about 2 male siblings coming in. They had been found and picked up at Motel Drive. The oldest is 11 and the other is 9. I start reading their case file, and there's a long abuse and neglect history. After being with us a few days, the 11-year-old is showing increased signs of PTSD, hypervigilance, paranoia, and aggression. He ends up pulling a knife on another one of the kids in the shelter because they came up from behind and grabbed him. Apparently, the mom was a drug user who was selling the 11-year-old out to Johns so she could get money and drugs. He would stay awake all night in the motel while she was out of it on drugs to make sure none of the Johns came back to hurt her or his younger brother. By the time the kid had turned 12, he had been expelled from 3 different elementary schools and was banned from that particular school district. Eventually, mom lost custody, and last I heard, they were placed in foster care. Story 3. Not CPS, but I worked in partnership with them. In all of these cases, CPS workers were on my side and their leadership was against them. They had far too many cases to be safe. A. I witnessed a physical assault on a child. It was incredibly violent, and the parent could have broken the child's neck while I was watching and moving towards them. I dialed 911 and stepped between them. I was later reprimanded for putting myself at risk. If the parent was willing to do that in front of me, what were they doing when no one could see? The state didn't move them into foster care because they were too old, and the oldest kid could watch out for the younger. B. I had an 11-year-old threaten to end themselves and refuse to safety contract. We called crisis intervention. They didn't come out because if she didn't safety contract, there wasn't a bed within 8 hours or so that would take her, and if they came out, they were responsible for her. I stayed with the client for, I think, about 14 hours. C. I had a biofather returned to the home after prison time for assaulting his daughter. They had the girls follow extensive safety procedures instead of telling the parents he couldn't return. There was likely a return to the abuse. The state didn't want to initiate a removal because she was old enough to learn to protect herself. D. I had a client with birth defects because he and his mother were the products of incest. The grandfather assaulted his much younger sister, and the mom was the result. He assaulted her, and my client was the result. He was following the pattern of aggressive behavior and kept being returned from the facility where he was being treated, right back to the family where he was being abused. It was absurd. As a side topic, if you're struggling with a drug addiction and think you're still a good parent, you aren't. That's your addiction fooling you. Get your kids into therapy and let them live elsewhere until you get yourself clean. Even not knowing all the details, I despise hearing things like in this story. Children who are being abused, or anyone who's being abused, being returned to their abuser, or their abuser being returned to them, is disgusting. It just reads to me as a complete lack of understanding of the situation or empathy or anything. And as I said, I don't know all the details, so maybe I'm wrong on this, but it just feels like an absolute failing of the system. Story 4. My case was slightly different from what many would think can be the worst. I had a report about an incorrigible child. Pretty normal stuff. Parents tried everything, but they cannot control their child, and are worried about the safety of the other children. This particular case was slightly different. The child and her 2 siblings were adopted by their grandparents. The grandparents stated that the one child, let's say her name was Ellen, was threatening to hurt her sibling, and actually went as far as to chase him around with a knife. Ellen was a 12-year-old at the time of this report. After further investigation and services with the family, I learned the full reason for the original adoption. When Ellen was younger, about 6, with her mother, she was being abused by the mother's boyfriend. When Ellen's mother found out about the abuse, she murdered the boyfriend in front of Ellen, and Ellen helped clean up the mess. Now come the grandparents, unable to figure out why Ellen is troubled now. After talking to Ellen more, she was angry at her younger sibling for being normal, as he was also present for the murder but was too young to remember. As I last kept up with the family, the grandparents and siblings left Ellen behind and moved to another state. Ellen is currently living with a foster family and is doing much better. Story 5. The one that hit me the hardest was before I actually started going out on my own and was shadowing the after hours team. We got a call from a different state worker about a family who had moved to our state, and we needed to follow up. The family had 6 kids, and the barely 12-year-old girl in the family was a registered intimate offender at 12. It was heartbreaking. It was a blended family, and the mom, who is the biological parent of the girl, believed that the girl had been exposed to adult content and banging by her bio dad. Anyway, one night one of the kids mentioned that the girl touched his dong. The parents, shocked, talked to each kid individually, where they all disclosed that she had touched them. Not knowing how to handle it, they called CPS in their state for help. CPS came out, called the cops, and for reasons that weren't clear to me, the child was placed on the registry by a judge. In my experience, usually they try inpatient and other therapies before going that route, but apparently the state and judge did things differently. So when the family moved to our state, we had to go out to make sure the family was following adequate guidelines. For example, the girl was not allowed to be alone with her siblings. She couldn't swim in the pool at the same time as her siblings. She couldn't go to school or the park or birthday parties because she was an offender. Her siblings couldn't have friends over. She was such a sweet kid. It really was a sad situation. She told us she wanted to be a fashion designer, and her favorite thing to do was play Xbox with her siblings. All the kids were in therapy, and they appeared to harbor no ill will toward her. I think about this case a lot, and I always wonder what happened to their family. I don't understand how a judge can make a ruling like this with no understanding of mental health, because it's not what they specialize in. Hey, fair enough. But I feel like for a case like this, they should at least get a referral from a professional in that sort of field. Wouldn't you agree? This kid does not deserve to be put on an offender registry. They're 12 and troubled, to say the very least. It's not their fault. They're just trying to grow up and they don't really understand everything. This one really does suck to hear. And the isolation from their siblings and not being allowed to go to school, yeah, sure, that's going to help their development. 100%. That's sarcasm, by the way. Story 6. Not a CPS worker, but my mom was a foster parent and ran a daycare out of the home. So we've known the specifics and assisted on a number of cases. One foster case was a child that was placed with us for about a week. He was a tiny little baby, and despite being in high school, I fed him. The mother was a teenage pregnancy who was abandoned by her parents for said pregnancy, and simply didn't know how to care for a baby. CPS was really understanding and gave her classes, and then when she learned how often a baby actually needed to be fed, she got her child back. She reached out to us and thanked us for everything, and we got regular updates. Child is 2 now and very happy and loved. Another case where we called CPS, a mother brought her 4 kids to our daycare. Her oldest son and 3 daughters. Oldest son was 7 and did most of the care for his younger siblings, ranging from 2 to 5 in age. Mother was pregnant again when she was obviously below the poverty line. Baby was born. Her kids got progressively more and more dirty to the point my mom reached out in a Facebook group for clothing donations for the kids. They would get dropped off, she would bathe them all, and dress them again. She made excuses for the mother, which she says now is her biggest regret. She kept saying, "This is her 5th child, she's a single mom and a new baby, it's hard." Then we had to care for the baby. Sickly, crapping blood. After 3 days with him, my mom called CPS. We were never told what happened with them, but I remember they came to pick some things up, and I remember looking out our front window and seeing them in the worker's car, all crying. It's hard, but you know it's better for them in the end. Story 7. Not a caseworker, but worked at a foster care agency for a while. Craziest case I heard about involved a kid that was very difficult to place because he had a bad habit of stealing cars, with a long rap sheet that was entirely stealing cars. The foster family he was placed with had their car stolen by him twice, and had a meeting with the caseworker about it. Well, while this caseworker was there, the kid managed to sneak out and steal the caseworker's car. He drove it to the park because he decided he wanted to go to the park. The kid was 9. I'm pretty sure they moved him to a group home after that. Story 8. I'm not a CPS worker, but I worked criminal investigations for the Army for a number of years, and worked very closely with CPS on our child abuse/neglect cases. One particular case sticks with me 5 years later. We received call around 1700, which is usually a good indicator that we're going to be responding to a legit call. The bad ones always seem to come in right before we head home for the evening. The call came in from CPS. They had received a call from a soldier's unit. The soldier, husband, was out in the field for training exercises and had gotten a very vague emergency call from his wife that she was having some medical problems. Husband asked his unit to send somebody to go check on his wife to make sure she was okay. Too easy. Unit sends a guy over who finds the wife in the kitchen covered in blood from the waist down in her underwear. He also notices a blood trail from a back room into the kitchen/foyer area. There is a bloody spatula on the counter. What's more is that there is animal feces and trash covering the entirety of the house, save for walking paths. There are 2 small children crying from somewhere in the back of the house. This dude immediately makes 2 calls, one back to his command and one to CPS. Command notifies husband, who is immediately sent home. Command also calls us. We received this call after the one from CPS. CPS reports the same story. They also inform us that the CPS worker who responded to the house had to call for help because they threw up from the smell of the house before they even got inside. We respond. We observe exactly what was initially reported. The sight is unimaginable if you've never seen anything like it. The smell was something between death and a landfill. We wore Tyvek suits to move around the house. When we finally get the wife cleaned up, she tells us that while using the bathroom, she had a very early-term miscarriage. She states that she had no idea what to do, so she grabbed the spatula from the kitchen and scooped the miscarriage into some diapers and towels, then threw everything into the freezer. Her intent was to keep them until her husband came home and then decide what to do. Absolute craziness of that aside, CPS and law enforcement have now seen the conditions of this house. After hospital visits and making sure everyone is physically and mentally healthy, we head back to the house with CPS to see what we're actually looking at. 2-story townhouse. The entire house was covered in trash, food, dishes, clothing, etc., as well as animal feces. The dining table was covered with the dirty dishes and rotting food. The food in the fridge was expired and moldy. There was no sitting room on the couch in the living room. The master bedroom had a queen bed, no sheets. The mattress had a dark brown stain covering over half of it. Was not positive for blood, never figured out what the hell it was. The kids only had mattresses on the floor, no other furniture in their rooms. Clothing, trash, and feces all over. The bathrooms. I've seen truck stop restrooms that were cleaner. The list of disgusting things in this house goes on. CPS gave them 3 weeks to fix this atrocity or the kids would be removed. In that time, both husband and wife get into more legal trouble. Not to detract from the story, but their charges included drugs and solicitation. CPS was finally able to get the kids out of that home. I never learned if the parents regained custody, but I pray they didn't. It was the absolute worst imaginable house I've ever seen. The smell stuck to your clothes. Housing said the only way the house would be safe to live in again would be if it were completely torn down. Not to mention the absolutely insane parents. We didn't hear a lot about the father in this scenario, but the mother certainly needs help of some kind. Like, this is not a normal state for people to be okay with living in. There is some mental stuff going on there that they probably need some assistance with. And with that in mind, I really do hope they did get the help they need, because being all right with living in squalor is bad for you and the children, obviously. I'm sure with the pregnancy and the following miscarriage, the whole mental state was not exactly helped. Maybe I'm cutting them too much slack here, but this seems like a mental health problem more so than a bad parents problem. But I guess it can be both, right? Because, oh boy, I'm not going to say she was a good mother. Story 9. I'm a CPS investigator, so I'm the front line for all the allegations. Here's some background just so you understand what my obligations are. Our state splits it up into 2 divisions, DHS and the state police, who have their own division. The state police get the worst allegations, such as abuse, immersion, severe physical abuse, and infant deaths. DHS gets the more run-of-the-mill, like cuts, bruises, welts, striking a child on the face or head, and any kind of neglect. I work for DHS. And here's the kicker. The state police can't do a removal. So if they feel a child is unsafe, they have to call us and we reassess, then make a removal based on our decision. So the worst case I've worked is a case of neglect, in which the 10-year-old female was in custody of her legal father. He was a drug user. Even when he met me for scheduled interviews, he was high. In itself, that's just terrible. But after every meeting, he would pick up and move, so I couldn't relocate. The final meeting he has with my supervisor while I attempt to locate the juvenile in order to take custody. He gets the gist of what's going on and has a friend pick the girl up from school and tells us he's having her sent to her aunt's home, but she never shows. Then he drops off too. Then he starts texting my work cell saying stuff like, "I'll end everyone before I let you take her." And remember, he's high on some hard stuff too. Finally, after 3 full days, I find her hiding under one of her friend's beds. He's arrested for fleeing. Find out this man is out on bond for taking a knife to the man who he thought called in the report. So I take custody of the child and have a hair follicle done. She tested significantly positive for the hard drugs, as if she ingested it herself as it was processed through her liver. What the hell? The only good thing is that she went to her aunt's home, who had a clean background and is safe. Girl just thought she was on an adventure with her dad. The worst case I've seen was a secondary response for the state police in order to do a removal. 8-month-old girl was being watched by her mother's boyfriend. The mom drove rigs for a living, so she was gone for long periods of time. The baby upset the man enough that he dipped her. We call it baby dipping. It's a thing. Prepare yourself. He got water boiling and put it in the tub. Then put the baby in the water. She had extensive burns over 70% of her body. That baby is going to have those scars forever. And to put yourself there, he got mad, put water to boil, waited for it to get hot, waited all that time knowing exactly what the hell he's going to use it for, and then did it. Heard her screaming, and then took her to his Podunk Regional Hospital. She had to be transported to the state's children's hospital. Then someone else had to call her mother and tell her what her boyfriend did to her daughter. And the worst part is, you get used to all that. Story 10. Not a CPS worker, but was an abused child. My mom's husband began touching me at 13. This continued nightly until I finally called the cops at 17. The CPS agent was so calm and comforting amidst all the drama. Told me no matter what, I could call her and she would be there for me. Anyway, the cops told me I was a harlot and was asking for it. My mom never believed me. I ended up living in an abandoned house for 5 months until I gave in and went back. Put a deadbolt on my door. He started full-on assaulting me when I was 18 because I was legal now. I'm 25. I still jump when I hear things behind me. Still have nightmares and extreme anxiety. My mom is still married to him, even after watching him beat the crap out of my younger brother and knowing he was assaulting me. She believes I seduced him. He's a full-on junkie now and will probably ruin my mom's life. I wish every day I called that kind CPS agent. She warned me that may happen. With all due respect here, I personally believe that everyone involved in this story except for the CPS agent and OP should go to hell. I know a lot of my takes come off as kind of lukewarm and try not to offend anybody or whatever, but this is revolting. I genuinely hope all of these people get exactly what's coming to them. I don't know what that is. I don't know exactly what they deserve. I won't pretend to either, but I hope they do. Story 11. First case I went on during training. Showed up at a house in a trashy town and instantly we are verbally assaulted by an obese, belligerent lady. This was Mom, and she was being accused of neglecting her children by not caring for their hygienic needs and not having any food. We tell her we need to chat with the kids alone, but she refuses and stands by as we start talking. She keeps interrupting and yelling whenever we ask anything. My trainer tells the cops because she can tell the situation is escalating quickly, and we need to talk to the kids. Cops show up and Mom sort of calms down, and we get to chat with the kids. Teenage boy is upset and refuses to tell us anything useful. 2 younger sisters, 8 to 11-ish, don't say much, but they didn't need to say anything. 2 little girls have nits in their hair so bad their scalp is bald and irritated on the back of their heads below the ears. Their hair was matted and basically one big dreadlock. These were white people, so matting their hair like that is hard. When it's clear that the tide is turning against the mom, she yells at the kids to run away and they follow orders. We spend the next hour trying to find the kids, and then trying to get them away from Mom, who has huddled them into a neighbor's yard in a corner. We get the kids back to a foster care agency office. No family was available to take the kids, and this was when my heart broke. The workers sit the girls on a chair over a large plastic sheet and start removing the nits with a knit brush/hairbrush. I watch as hundreds and hundreds of dead/living nits fall to the plastic under the girls, and they start to cry because of it hurting. The workers were as gentle as possible, but they had to have been infested for months, if not longer. This is when I totally broke down and left the room and had to collect myself. It turned out the mom had significant mental health needs that she wasn't caring for, and had been ignored by family for years, so no one knew what was going on. School officials claimed they didn't notice anything, but we suspected the kids weren't coming into school, and they liked it that way. Story 12. One of my uncles was a CPS worker for a good amount of time before he just couldn't do it anymore. I can remember 2 cases that he brought up while at a get-together. 1. Mom was sending her 6 to 8-year-old daughter over the border to Mexico on a bus, where she would be picked up by a bunch of men who would keep her for a few hours before sending her back with payment. 2. Dad was assaulting his 16-year-old son to the point that he developed a defense mechanism that involved crapping on himself to keep his dad away. He ended up having to wear adult diapers after CPS took him because his defense mechanism became his go-to for whenever he felt scared. Story 13. I was fortunate in that I never had to deal with a child's death. The case that still haunts me is an 11-year-old girl in a psychiatric hospital after having hallucinations and ideations. Her family's case file was 2 inches thick. Her grandfather inappropriately touched her when she was a toddler. Later on, she was touched by the nice, friendly neighbor whom her father asked to pick her up from school, who just happened to be a registered offender. When I got her case, she was perping on her much younger half-brother, in addition to the hallucinations and thoughts of ending her own life. Her father was a lousy piece of crap, who couldn't be bothered to actually work and provide for his family, and her stepmother hated her. At one point, I almost had her father persuaded to place her in a wonderful group home, but then he changed his mind. I'll never forget when he called me and proudly told me he'd spent 4 hours on the phone but finally found a charity who would pay for his daughter's prescriptions. I tried to get her out of that home. We couldn't offer any services because, as evidenced by the 2-inch thick file, their family had every service available and nothing had changed. I reviewed it with my supervisor and legal, and they wouldn't approve it because she wasn't in immediate danger. So it wasn't a problem that she was touching her younger brother, and her thoughts of ending her life didn't consist of immediate danger, apparently. I dream about her every once in a while, and wonder if she's still alive. Story 14. I was a case manager for CPS. I had a toddler on my caseload who came into care because of a severe beating that left her with a skull fracture and 2 broken femur bones. She was in a full body cast. She was in medical foster care. The mission of the agency was to have children reunify with the parents, so the parents had to complete a case plan and attend court hearings. It took a while, but the parents completed the case plan and the child was reunified. During this time, Mom became pregnant again with a baby boy. She delivered around the same time the reunification occurred. The parents found the baby boy dead one morning. He was 6 weeks old and the same age his sister was when she came into care, and he had the same injuries. Before the reunification and the birth, I did everything I could to prevent either child from going back into the house. I even begged and cried in court. Dad was a suspect, but there wasn't enough evidence. He was a true monster. I waited 2 weeks, put in my notice, and walked out. Story 15. Before I worked as a social worker, I was direct care staff at a group home for teenage girls. One girl, B, was battling drug and alcohol addiction. She was only 13 years old at the time, and had been placed with us through her treatment program. She lived about 40 minutes away from the group home, and the goal was to remove her access to her addictions while providing support. B and I had discussed her major triggers for using, and she mentioned her relationship with her mother was a major stressor. That night, I heard firsthand how bad things were. During a phone call on speaker so we could monitor, I listened to this woman berate her daughter for no reason. I stepped in and ended the call, as B ran upstairs to her room. The mother called back and continued her rant. I handed the phone to my supervisor and went to find B. I found her in her closet, crying on the floor. She didn't want to talk, but she leaned on me and cried. I gave her some space and went back downstairs to talk to my supervisor. Within a few minutes, B had left the group home. She had no stop order. We couldn't physically stop her from leaving, and apologized as she ran off. We called the police and reported her AWOL. When I left that night, she hadn't returned. The following day, I got to the group home and was happy to see B had come back on her own. We notified her mom of her return. Mom called the town police and demanded B come home. She and the officers arrived and B refused to go. Mom tells B in front of everyone that she won't lock her in her room as long, and she promises to feed her this time. We were shocked, but no one had any legal power to refuse B going back to this horrible situation. We were all powerless as she left back into the care of her abusive mother. B left me a poem, and I still have it nearly 12 years later. My heart hurts just wondering what happened to her. No one heard from her after that day. Story 16. A close friend of mine used to work for CPS, and I've heard quite a few of her stories. There was one where a woman had twin babies and was high out of her mind one night and put bleach in her baby's bathwater instead of soap. Gave them some good burns, I think, and they were later removed from the home. There was also a case that was widely heard of around here where a girl's boyfriend put her baby under a couch cushion and smothered it to death because it was crying. Sad part about it was he wasn't even high on anything, just simply an evil man. There's also something going on where I work right now in a school system where I heard of a family with 5 children, where the parents are so worthless that the eldest brother, first grade, has to get the other 2 up and dressed in the mornings, because the parents are still asleep. There are 2 other children in kindergarten and the other 2 are infants. Contemplated calling CPS, but I've been told it's almost worthless because we don't have proof of them being neglected or abused. It's just so sad to think of what some of the kids go through at home. The system sucks. Story 17. This is not CPS, but a very similar issue. I did an internship with an organization that helped human trafficking victims. It was seriously horrific. I cannot understand how any human can treat another human in these horrific manners. I'll share the worst case without too much detail. A 14-year-old girl from a South American country was rescued in part of a raid on a forced labor rescue operation. The laborer's situation was bad enough, but the girl was held in a trailer and was provided to the workers for physical relief. The room had a mattress, a nightstand with paper towels, and a teddy bear. When I heard the details, I threw up. I originally wanted a career in human rights. This case broke me. I realized I don't have the emotional capacity required. I felt a lot of guilt after my decision to change tracks, but I know I'm no good to victims when I was so emotionally disturbed and wrapped up. I still do advocacy from a distance as a private person. I try to help people understand the horrors, and I try to keep an eye out for possible trafficking situations, but I can't be directly involved like I was. Humanity is truly terrifying. Story 18. I actually have 2. When I was 4, I had a friend who was a year younger than me, Zizi, not her real name. Our mothers were friends. My mom never did anything harder than pot, but one day Zizi's mom just up and left for Florida to go on a hard drug binge. This part I learned as an adult from my mother. Zizi stayed with her grandma and her boyfriend Jesse. Real name, by the way, rotten hell Jesse. One day Zizi asked me if I wanted to know a secret. Being 4, I said yes. She said Jesse made her lick his thing, and then she giggled and I giggled too. I didn't really understand it. When you're 4, adults are weird. My mom must have suspected something, because she asked me what Zizi told me that night as I slept in her bed, and I told her. I remember the silence afterwards, or maybe I just took too long to fall asleep. My mom called the cops. I don't know what happened to Jessie, but I do know that Zizi was raised by her grandma, and they moved away soon after that. My mom and Zizi's mom had a falling out because her mom called CPS against my mom in retaliation. I work in preschools now, and every time a kid asks me if I want to hear a secret, my heart freezes, but I always say yes. Here's the second one. This kid, 1.5, starts at the preschool. The mom's brother recently died of an overdose, and the parents are worried about him being surrounded by grieving family, especially because of the strong resemblance between the dead uncle and my student. If you didn't already know, having a family member, especially a sibling, die from their own means, even accidentally, ups your chances of dying from ending yourself. The parents split up, and I noticed the maternal grandma and her husband doing more pickup duties. Mom has been awarded custody with dad having visitation rights. Then comes the kicker. Mom starts doing drugs again. Grandma requests that if she comes to pick up the child that I call the police and stall until they come. I start to see dad more. Grandma and her husband have taken over mom's custody but given dad more visitation. Then grandma's husband leaves her because he didn't sign up for this. I see mom a couple of times, always with grandma or dad, and that's as much as I know. Kid ended up moving to another center soon after that. The first one is absolutely tragic, but it seems to have at least been caught early, and as such any trauma resulting should be on the smaller side, I would hope. I hope that Zizi's grandma was an incredible person and managed to really pull through for her granddaughter. Also, as a side note, I hope it's obvious why I didn't do character voices for this thread, just out of respect for everyone involved, especially for the children. I was absolutely not going to even potentially make a mockery of these situations. This is serious stuff, and even though it's just being read in a video on YouTube, I think it should be treated as such. Anyway, that is all the stories we have for today. As I like to do after these tougher subjects, I would encourage you to go seek out whatever makes you happy right now, whatever helps you relax, just anything to sort of, I don't know, bring the mental state to a more zen place. I think it's really important and good to engage with things like this and acknowledge that they happen and what you might want to do about it as a person in the world. But I also know it's important to take care of yourself as well. So please do that in however you do it. For now, though, I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.